Thank you for attending the 2014 International Engagement on Cyber Conference. My name is Catherine Lotrionte, and I'm the Director of the Institute for Law, Science, and Global Security here at Georgetown. This is our 4th year of running this conference, and I'm really quite thrilled and happy to see how much the conference has grown over the last couple of years, especially as it's become more and more international in participation. At the Institute here at Georgetown, our goal is focused on educating students and others on some of the most important aspects of cybersecurity, especially as it pertains to international engagement. Part of doing that over the last 6 years, when I took over the Institute, has been through teaching classes, building curriculum, conducting research, and engaging in outreach with the U.S. government, foreign governments, the private sector, and academia, both domestically and abroad. An important part of that effort has been this annual conference to convene some of the world's experts on cybersecurity from multiple disciplines. Over the last 4 years since we started the conference, we've been fortunate to host over 100 different foreign governments and facilitate a discussion among these governments, the U.S. government, the private sector, and academics. Some of the most challenging issues in the cyber domain have been debated here each year. While the issues are diverse and pose their own unique challenges, they all remain open for further debate. Just to highlight some of the topics you will hear about today: how nation-states can better protect cyberspace without restricting the open flow of information on the internet. What should countries consider when developing international cybersecurity standards and protocol? How law enforcement has made progress against the growing cybersecurity threats. The future of internet governance and how it may be vastly different from what we have known it to be so far. And developing norms for acceptable behavior in cyberspace that may one day succeed in minimizing escalation in that domain. This is just to name a few of the topics for today's discussions. The relevance of these issues today cannot be any more clearer than through the most recent events playing out in the Ukraine, where the question of how the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine will play out in the cyber domain is in the minds of many nation-states currently. I look forward to our discussions today, and I'm happy that you could all join us in this quite chilly and snowy weather. I'd ask all of you throughout the day, and I'll repeat this at various times, when we get into the question and answer sessions, that everyone identifies themselves and tries to limit their questions to one so we have time for everybody to ask their questions. I'd like to just briefly say a few things about our sponsors, who actually are really important because without their help, none of us actually would be here today. Every year, I'm quite overwhelmed and surprised by the generosity of our sponsors. Often I go out and ask and feel quite embarrassed when I'm asking for money, and I'm quite surprised when at times they offer more in return for just asking. Intel Security, Kaspersky Lab, and Lockheed Martin happen to be 3 of our platinum sponsors, the platinum sponsors this year. To say a little bit about them, many of you may know a lot of what they do. Some of you may not be as familiar. We've partnered with these companies and others to do some important research and work, so sometimes it's worthwhile thinking about what the private sector can offer. Intel Security empowers businesses, as you know, the public sector, and home users to safely experience the benefits of the internet. In addition to delivering security solutions and threat intelligence, Intel Security is working with its public and private sector partners to establish cybersecurity strategies and standards to protect the world's digital infrastructure. Lockheed Martin is not only a generous sponsor of today's event, but is a great friend of the university. Many of you joining us here today with us represent more than the 20 companies that belong to the Lockheed Martin Cybersecurity Alliance. They have a unique center just up the road in Gaithersburg, Maryland, where they conduct cyber research and development with their alliance partners, connected with laboratories and development centers worldwide. And Kaspersky Lab is a global leader in the cybersecurity technology, products, and research. The lab has opened a new subsidiary based in the United States National Capital Region, the Kaspersky Lab Government Security Solutions, Inc., which will be run here by Adam Firestone, who is one of our panelists today. To our silver and bronze sponsors this year, our conference would not be possible without your support. You can see the list of these companies here on the screen to my left. These companies represent the very best in what they do, and I'm really grateful that we have them as partners, and some of them have been partners from the very beginning when we started this conference. A few words about our speakers for today. You'll see their names and you'll have their bios with you today as you walk through and sit through the various panels for today's events. Some of the speakers are old friends of mine and some are new friends, but they have one thing in common. They are personally dedicated to the issues in which they'll talk about today. Many of them have worked on these issues for multiple decades and given up their personal lives in order to do it. The issues are not just for them something to discuss and meet with the press about, but to actually work on diligently throughout their entire adult lives. So we've been able to convene some of the world leaders, and when I say that, I really mean it. I want to thank all of the speakers that have made it here today, especially given the difficult weather conditions. I'm lucky to call them a lot of them friends, and I continue to build bigger and larger circles as we gather more diverse people and more international people at the conference. And lastly, I want to just thank a couple of the key people who have helped me day to day in putting the event together. They're here at Georgetown and they worked through quite a lot of difficult challenges with respect to the weather in particular. I want to thank Allison and Jacob and Jake and James Michael. Three of them are just young students here at Georgetown, first being introduced to the issues of cybersecurity and being able to and willing to work under some very stressful conditions with me to bring you all here today. And now I'd like to introduce our first keynoter for today's conference, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Senator Whitehouse served as Rhode Island's Director of Business before being nominated by President Bill Clinton to be Rhode Island's U.S. Attorney in 1994. He was elected Attorney General of Rhode Island in 1998, a position in which he served until 2003. On November 7, 2006, Rhode Islanders elected Mr. Whitehouse to the U.S. Senate, where he is a member of the Budget Committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and the Special Committee on Aging. He is the chairman of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism and of the EPW Subcommittee on Oversight. And he has worked diligently on spreading the word and educating the public and bringing about a heightened awareness of the cybersecurity threats to our nation, to our country, to our people, and to the world. Senator, thank you for joining us this morning, and I want to welcome you to the podium.
Thank you, Dr. Lotrionte, for that kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here at the Georgetown Institute for Law, Science, and Global Security. This is the fourth year, and it has become a notable forum. So, Dr. Lotrionte, congratulations on your success with it. It's a pleasure to be here at Georgetown and to join what you will see as a very distinguished group of speakers addressing the urgent need that we have to strengthen our cybersecurity, both within and beyond our borders. Some time ago when I was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, I was a co-author of the cyber report, and I have been energetically interested in this issue for some time. As you know, cyber attacks come in many forms. Cyber criminals steal our personal information. Foreign intelligence services infiltrate our networks to lay the foundation for cyber sabotage. Terrorists seek to disrupt our critical infrastructure. Foreign governments steal intellectual property worth billions of dollars from American businesses to help their own industries. And all sorts of other criminals, ranging from so-called hacktivists who shut down websites to send political messages, to spammers whose botnets generate junk messages by the millions, launch daily attacks on our networks. As this theater of activity grows, spurred by an emerging technology, I see a useful parallel in the history of the Air Force. The United States Air Force actually started as a subpart of the Army's Signal Corps. made up then largely of balloons used to look behind enemy lines. During World War I, our air power lagged behind that of our allies. When the war ended, the British made the Royal Air Force an independent branch of their military. Our air service became the Army Air Corps. By 1939, we had fewer than 2,000 aircraft in our military. When World War II broke out, it was immediately clear that control of the skies would be essential to military success, and our arsenal of democracy went to work. We were able to manufacture tens of thousands of planes in a remarkably short period of time. And air power, including air power projected from Navy aircraft carriers in the Pacific, proved instrumental to our victory. It was only after the war that the Air Force finally became an independent branch. And since then, we've maintained the strongest Air Force in the world. So how is this history about aircraft and the Air Force relevant? It tells us that emerging technologies can outgrow organizational structures. Breakthrough technologies like aircraft then and cyber now require us to be constantly adapting. My question to you is, do the structures we have in place today adequately anticipate the threats that we may face in the future? In my role as the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism, I've made it a priority to look at this question and to exercise oversight of the Justice Department's response to the cyber threat. Thanks to Chairwoman Barbara Mikulski of the Senate Appropriations Committee, who was actually one of the co-authors of my cyber report, the spending bill Congress just passed requires the Justice Department to prepare a, quote, multi-year strategic plan on its cybersecurity efforts. I have long believed that such a review was needed, and I'm grateful that Senator Mikulski included this requirement. It is due on May 17th, and we will be watching for it. I have called on the Department of Justice to embrace this mandate as an opportunity to think ahead about the resources and structures we will need, both to stop the next generation of cyber threats and to punish those responsible for them. For example, there are many excellent agents and prosecutors across the Department of Justice who are knowledgeable about the cyber threat and who work every day to stop it. Is it time to consolidate cybersecurity efforts under one roof? Consider that the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives exist as independent agencies tasked to combat threats that could well prove less consequential than the cyber threat. Practical results can often give us warnings of structural problems and gaps. For instance, there has not been, to my knowledge, a single prosecution brought against an agent of a foreign government for a pure cyber theft of American intellectual property. General Alexander, from whom you'll have the opportunity to hear a little later, has estimated that American companies lose $250 billion each year due to this kind of intellectual property cyber theft. Cyber theft of American intellectual property has been described by myself and others as the greatest illicit transfer of wealth in human history, and no prosecutions. Some in government fear that prosecuting a foreign actor will draw reprisals against our own intelligence activities. But there is a critical distinction between what we do and what some other nations do, a distinction that is often lost on critics. Our intelligence activities are spy versus spy. In the language of one intelligence agency, our activities are, quote, focused and specifically deployed against and only against valid foreign intelligence targets in response to intelligence requirements. We do not steal intellectual property to give it to American businesses so they can get an unfair leg up on foreign competitors. And we should not tolerate it when other nations do that to us. As I have drilled into this question of administrative structure and resources, one of the obstacles I've encountered has been defining the resources devoted to cybersecurity. There's a fair amount of overcounting going on out there. Is a federal prosecutor sitting in on a cyber conference call with his phone on mute while working on his caseload of non-cyber matters really countable as a cyber prosecutor? Are agents who specialize in collecting electronic evidence at crime scenes really what we mean by cyber investigators? And how about civil lawyers? The FBI has been very effective in using civil complaints to target botnets, successfully taking down the Citadel and Coreflood botnets, among others. How do we fit this important civil net hygiene function in with the criminal duties of prosecutors and agents in the Department of Justice? Congress has a job to do here. Our cyber laws are woefully out of date. In 2012, I worked with a bipartisan group of senators to try to pass a comprehensive cyber bill. We came close. We came so close. But in the end, a particular organization's politics got in the way. Many in Congress believe that we should now not try to pass a comprehensive cyber bill, not at least until the debate over NSA surveillance dies down. I disagree. I believe that we should do everything we can to update our laws to address this emerging cyber threat. And we need to take a serious look at restructuring our law enforcement response for the coming years. Don't give up on Congress entirely. I have partnered with 3 of my colleagues, Republicans Roy Blunt and Lindsey Graham, and Democrat Richard Blumenthal, on legislation to spotlight the cyber threat. Too many Americans have no clue or only a faint appreciation of the dangers out in cyber world. Our bill would require agencies across the government to report publicly on cyber attacks and the steps that they are taking to address those threats. For instance, it would require the Department of Justice to report on those prosecutions. It would require the SEC to report on whether American corporations are adequately informing their shareholders about risks associated with cybersecurity. As we all know, there are 2 kinds of major American companies: those that have been hacked and those that don't know they have been hacked. The American people need to better understand the nature of the cyber threat. That will empower us in Congress to take the action that we need to take. And our bill would help convey to the American public the information they need to push for wise decisions. We are working now with bipartisan leaders of the House on cyber to try to get this to be a bicameral as well as a bipartisan bill. And if we can get there, I think it stands a very good chance of being brought to the floor and passed. Those of us in Congress who are concerned about cybersecurity will keep working to strengthen our laws and protect our nation against cyber attacks. And will continue to work with our partners in law enforcement to ensure that we are dedicating the necessary resources to do everything in our power to stop the cyber threat. And we await with interest May 17th. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today. I think I have time to take some questions. Michael will watch the clock. I know it's early and you're not fully caffeinated. Yes, sir.
Hi, Mike Best. We talk a lot about prosecuting cybercrime after the fact and using security to try to prevent it. But when we're talking about national security, foreign intelligence services, and so-called hacktivists, there's very little discussion about cyber counterintelligence being used either offensively or defensively. And I think that needs to be added to the discussion. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on why that hasn't been such a focus.
Probably because it's heavily classified, and the less people know about what our counterintelligence efforts look like, the more likely they are to succeed.
Well, that's certainly true, but there has been, to my knowledge, very little that has been discussed openly or in closed sessions similar to this. And there hasn't been any discussion about the need for it, which seems especially important because of the NSA debates that are going on right now.
Well, I am off the Intelligence Committee for a couple of years now, but certainly when I was on it, this question of how we were responding to the cyber threat was one that got considerable attention, and I believe from my colleagues who are still on that committee that it still is getting considerable attention there, and I think it's certainly getting enormous attention within the Cyber Command and within the NSA. So I don't know that the public discussion is following the classified discussion, but I think the classified discussion is pretty robust.
I certainly agree that the public discussion is separate from the classified discussion, but when we're talking about debates of necessity, no one has been advocating that to the public, while large portions of the public are essentially calling for the NSA to be stripped down to bare bones, which is a huge mistake.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think the NSA and the administration would have been wise to have prepared for the possibility of a sudden, catastrophic, unauthorized leak of information. That's a drill that you would think that an agency that specialized in the retention of massive amounts of classified information would be preparing for on a regular basis, in the same way that the crew of a commercial aircraft prepare for a drill that takes place if there's a sudden, unexpected decompression of the aircraft. And in fact, when the news broke of the Snowden releases, I think a lot of damage was done in the days and weeks that followed because the response was so slow and so vague, and it took a long time until the people could get it together to put a true story out there. And as you know, the old line about the fable has gotten across town before the truth gets its boots on. And if you add a week or two to the truth having to declassify itself to get its boots on, it was a problem. And for people like me who had watched that program very carefully and were prepared to defend the rationale for it and explain the massive oversight that it received, we were stuck. Because if you're a member of Congress, you are not a declassifier. And even if something is out there, unless it has been formally declassified, you can be arrested for commenting on or echoing things that, even if they're out in the public domain, because now you're confirming it to be true. So a lot of voices were stilled by the slow way that the response came out, and I hope that that's a lesson that, frankly, all of our agencies that maintain classified information are paying attention to, because I think it was a very unfortunate moment. And to this day, I go home and Rhode Islanders come up to me and say, why is it that that NSA group gets to listen into my phone calls? You know, you got to start from square one. No, they don't. Let's just start with that, and then you explain how it works. But we got completely run away with by that story because there did not appear to be a plan being executed as how you respond to that circumstance of a sudden, unauthorized, catastrophic leak of information.
Thank you for your answer, sir.
The gentleman right behind you.
Good morning. My name is Scott Durant, and I'm a student here at Georgetown.
Good morning.
I was just wondering, I completely agree with you that there's definitely a need to encourage law enforcement and the Justice Department to start finding a way to prosecute against these crimes. What is it, do you think that students and younger people that are starting to break into this field, what kind of skills do you think they need that could help push this forward and actually make it happen, that we can start holding people responsible and these foreign governments responsible for the theft that they are making against the U.S.?
There's a whole array. I mean, the cyber issue is obviously, at its ultimate core technological heart, a very technical electric engineering and computer science issue. And if your disposition is in that direction, there's an abundant field for people to make an important contribution. If you're not in that field, if you're like me and that makes your head hurt, then there are enormous and very interesting policy questions that are raised by the fact that this is a world without borders, for instance. And so a lot of the conventions and laws and treaties and things that have grown up over time about the nature of sovereignty and what is permissible, even if covert activity and all of that their fundamental premises are thrown into question because there's not a geographic boundary here. And if you're interested in being a lawyer and looking at this from a prosecutor's point of view, I will credit the Department of Justice with a couple of things. I mean, I fault them for not making these cases, but the FBI in particular is throwing so much work into the NCI-JTF and into keeping track of who's coming through the doors and windows and letting the companies who they're raiding know that they're being raided, because most American companies are not aware when a foreign intelligence service gets into its research materials and its processes and patterns and blueprints and all that. That absorbs an enormous amount of the effort. That's sort of you got to put out the fire, and the fire is still being lit every day, so the firefighters have to be putting out the fire. But at some point, the fire marshal has to come in and figure out who's to blame and try to assign that responsibility. And when that happens, these are amazingly challenging cases. They are technologically complex in terms of the forensic skills that are required. They are legally complicated. They involve very often foreign actors, and so you have to deal with the legats, and you have to deal with all the issues of cross-country, cross-border prosecutions. They bump up against and constantly involve classified activity that you have to be prepared to protect and be cleared to manage. You put all those things together. I did some pretty complicated cases when I was the U.S. Attorney in Rhode Island, and I'll be the first person to concede that the most complicated case that we did, that required the most approval from the Department of Justice, that required the most complex backstopping of undercover agents being brought in, that required the most complicated, racketeering theories and all that, was a walk in the park compared to a cyber theft case against a foreign, particularly foreign government-related actor for the theft of American intellectual property. So it's not easy. And it's a skill set that I think is going to take some developing, and that's one of the reasons I do think that we need to continually be reconsidering whether the administrative structure through which we manage that process is keeping up to date, or are we still a piece of the Signal Corps, or are we still just the Army Air Corps? Does this need to be an actual Air Force standing on its own? So thank you for your question. Thank you all for your interest in this very timely subject, and have a wonderful day with some really, really terrific and knowledgeable speakers who Dr. Lotrionte has brought for you. Thank you.